Okay, we should be recording.
Okay. Yep.
Let's see. All right. Hello, this is episode 57 of the Following Mechanical Turks project. So we've got a draft of the second product. We'll talk a little bit about that. And then potentially options for upcoming guests. So right now the draft is it's posted on the project site, although because Manifold it really isn't super attuned to collaborative production. It's more effective at having sort of a finished manuscript that then can receive comments,
right,
and other forms of annotation. It's pretty good at that, but it's not, I mean, it's not like a flaw exactly. It's just that it's really kind of designed for end products rather than things that are in progress.
Yeah.
So all that is to say, we've got a version on the project site, but we also duplicated that in Google Docs just so it's easier to collaborate in sort of the writing phase. That's where we are now with that. And we talked about last time ideas about how to potentially revise it. Did you say you had thoughts about that?
Yeah, I just was thinking through the introduction. And it's actually kind of a simple thing, but it potentially raised some questions for me about thinking about how readers will read this and their sort of their own, potentially what thoughts they might be bringing into this. So in the introduction, there's the kind of the opening paragraph that sort of sets the scene. And then there's a sort of interim paragraph that gets at, right, the premise. The promise comes with the menace of replacement anxiety. And I wonder, because that's really not what it's kind of an aside, but I wonder if that will signal to people that that's kind of the focal point, where really the focal point kind of comes in that third paragraph. So just one of those things where I think the way that we understand it is right, like it immediately calls attention to this, right, and then kind of explains it, but you know, still it's a cultability to summarize book should be contextualized. That I wonder if we can just jump straight from that first paragraph to the third paragraph, because we're really not dealing with like replacement anxiety precisely, but I wonder by having that be the kind of first or second move that it'll signal that that's kind of what but that's such an evocative phrase that I think people won't necessarily read it as the kind of, right, of course it brings up this, but we still need to, right, it's not that, but I still wonder if, like, as soon as it's almost like the don't think of an elephant. Well, now I'm thinking of an elephant, right? So
yeah, let's see. Learned about a C average, investing some human participants in history, law, and research methods, and only wiping out in creative writing. Yeah, of course. Placement anxiety. It's an automated chess playing forebear, the mechanical Turk.
right, so I like that move but most of our thing hasn't been the replacement anxiety that surrounded
the
mechanical Turk, but precisely the not replacement anxiety so much as just ambiguity about who's doing what within the system.
Right.
So I don't really think people saw the mechanical Turk and thought, oh shit, there goes my job as a chess player.
Yeah, I mean, although you know, it raises the questions of the definitional question of,
right,
I mean, that you see also in Plato, right? That, I mean, like, if it's doing this, then what am I anymore?
Yeah,
I don't know. It's a good question.
Yeah, because I mean, I think it's what we're getting at, but it kind of just, I was imagining someone sort of over attaching to that replacement anxiety, whereas we're more interested in the sort of co-construction of readability.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I mean, even that, right, that if you look at the kind of heteromation stuff we've looked at, right, the human being isn't being replaced in terms of being swapped out. They're just being put someplace else.
Mhm.
So they're being, displaced, as opposed to, no, you're still involved in the transaction. You're just now, we've replaced the teller with you by means of the ATM machine, right? So the teller has been replaced, but the human hasn't.
Yeah. Yeah.
So in many ways, right, it got me thinking about the kind of not thinking about the third product, but right, the kind of what kind of theoretical terminology is being developed here to talk about these things. And because we haven't written the third project yet, we're not quite there. So,
Yeah.
we're not stuck. We're kind of using the already extant language around this, which is something like replacement anxiety. But what we're getting at is kind of, it's related to that, but it's kind of oblique to it in some way.
Yeah. All right. Well, it's something to look at.
Yeah.
I put in a comment there.
Excellent.
What else has popped up?
Well, I still have not gotten to it yet, but trying to kind of flesh out the on the kind of, I think, the important genealogy that's traced from orality to literacy to electracy. So maybe fleshing out the Ulmer a little bit more.
Right.
I think that's the more I thought about it, the more I think that is one of the primary audiences for this. So I think if we were thinking about if we weren't engaging those folks, we could just kind of not name check, but right, like, and here's Ulmer's formulation of it. But if we're actually potentially thinking that people are interested in that trajectory, might be audiences, and we probably have to bring a little bit more.
Yeah.
A citation of Ulmer and Holmvik probably aren't going to cut the mustard, even with reviewers.
Yeah, and I think we talked about that previously, because there are some notes here about potential revisions.
We talked about it before, but in fact, I have one of my PhD students, Byron Gilman Hernandez, is kind of working in a similar vein. So the kind of extension of this, there's some interesting stuff that we could probably dig into.
Yeah, let's see. So, I mean, how is this being framed here? Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Because the crux of this is the question of what is post literacy.
Right.
I think what we talked about last time was this is sort of a bare bones, right? Because I mean, even if it's pulling from, Long and Homovec and Ulmer, that's, it's covering a sweep of 40 some years.
Right. And yeah. And again, as always, how much of that do we need to get into? And do we want to get into, right? The tension between, we might want to dig in this more for ourselves, but also, what are our viewers' expectation of what in 2022, what is a earnest engagement with this look like?
because ultimately it looks like the goal of this is to to get at this, the notion of it's not resolved what the base unit or what the focus of contemporary literacy is. I mean, it's like that's the goal of this, is to open up that space that ultimately the discussion fills with the human intelligence task. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's the driving goal. So that would be the question in revising this section is, what's going to be appropriate to open up that space, you know?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, that's a question of how should this part be developed in order to do that? I agree that right now it seems a very sort of like sketch-like, where it's kind of touching a few things. Right. It's not necessarily the case that proves that space is there. I mean, like maybe that's what needs to be there is more evidence that is unresolved.
Yeah.
I don't know. I bring it up because, I mean, the question is, to develop this, would it be prudent to try and drill into like the Ulmer stuff, even though it's like, I don't think the thesis of this is, so this is in line with what Ulmer said. You know what I mean?
Right. We're not sort of fleshing out or contributing to that.
No.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of like how much of this is, right. We're not setting out to, you know, on table one, right? Our goal, we didn't start out doing this to fill in that box of the base unit.
Well, but I mean, that's kind of what this does. I mean, that's
right. But yeah.
So, I mean, in terms of developing it, would the appropriate way to develop this be to try and show that it's a legitimate conversation, that this element of whatever literacy is now is debatable? I mean, like, is that the conversation that this is entering, that we don't really know what to call contemporary literacy? And if so, then is the way to prove that by adding not more about these folks, but a broader picture of this conversation is not resolved, and so we are a voice in that conversation. I mean, it's like, you know, typical sort of lit review stuff. It's like, what's the conversation you're entering? Yeah. Is the way to flesh that out by showing like more people who are talking about this and who have ideas about what it might be?
Well, that's why it's method, right? Because our method is not going to be citing 40 more people. Our method is to cite Mechanical Turks.
Yeah.
Right. What is it putting in the box?
Yes. And I mean, in order to do that, do we have to outline the disciplinary conversation about this topic?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm thinking in terms of like, so right now it is a bit of a sketch, but how do you make it more detailed? Do you provide more stuff about the people you've already cited? And I'm not sure. I mean, I think what you do is you provide a better view of this conversation that is more contemporary and broader. Because like now, it's sort of like, I mean, I think the point of this is, you know, this question about what's the base unit of contemporary literacy is unresolved. And as proof of that, it's really pointing to 3 people going back to 1971. So it's like, as a reader, I would say that's a pretty sparse history. I mean, if you're covering that sweep, it's like, well, gosh, you need somebody connecting 1971 for, you know what I mean? It's like, you need more people here, because otherwise it's like, you know, it's sort of like the way we kind of treat rhetoric history, where it's like, And yeah, Augustine represented 1,000 years. And it's like, that's always been unsatisfying, where it's like, what happened
Right.
between 500
Uh-huh.
and 1,500? You know, it's not
Yeah.
really this, it's like, yeah. And so it's an unresolved conversation. And here's three people from, now I
Right.
get
It
five.
may be that it's resolved and you knuckleheads haven't read enough.
Yeah. So, I mean, like, in order to, and the point of it's like, the point of the paper isn't to go over a thorough history of this, but I think
No.
what we need to do is legitimately say this is a conversation.
Yeah.
We're not straw manning this conversation.
No. And I think your move to broader, not deeper, I think is the way to think about it, because it's also a way of we're engaging the conversation.
Yeah.
But we're not we're engaging that conversation, but we're not having it. In other words, right, we're not here to parse the difference.
Yeah.
Right. We're not here to resolve something about Ulmer.
Right. Yeah.
But we are recognizing that this conversation, of which these three people are a part,
Yeah.
is tugging at or identifying something that's crucial to what we're doing.
Yes.
But we're not weighing in, I guess, is maybe the way to think about it.
Well, yeah, yeah. I mean, in the sense that in sort of a typical rhetoric paper, you might expect most of the labor to be like untangling that conversation.
Right.
And here it's sort of like, no, this is background info that this conversation is happening, but the focus is here's how Mechanical Turk might be answering this.
Right. And that's why it's in the methods section as opposed to the introduction.
Yeah. It's, I mean, really what it is, like, because the methods has two moves. It has essentially the theoretical conversation it's entering, and then the practicality of how it's doing that, which is just, the straight up, here's the surveys and what's on them.
Yeah. Which is really interesting. I mean, because that's why at this point, right, the kind of move ahead to the third piece is, given what we're doing, sort of disentangling that. I mean, the way that I think a kind of common sense and for me sort of specious distinction of theory and practice, in many ways, the kind of our methodological engagement with Mechanical Turks is our theoretical apparatus.
Well, and another way to consider this, and this, like when I talk with students about this, particularly like teaching the science class, there's a sense in which this paper, well, I mean, it's structured in IMRAD format. I mean, it is. And so part of the M in IMRAD is often your lit review, right?
Yeah.
You usually start methodologically with your lit review, because what you're answering there is what's been said about this topic already.
Right.
And that's really what this is. It's like,
Yeah.
what's been said about the base unit already? I mean, what's been said? Ulmer said this, Young said that, but nobody's considered this. And so we're considering that through this mechanism. I mean, that's, in IMRAD, that's what you do. They kind of dispense with the lit review often as a part of the methods section.
Yeah, that makes sense. And the way that you trace it out is spot on in terms of what's happening here.
Well, it's because it's how I wrote it. I mean, I wrote this as an IMRAD, and then went through those components of like, okay, so what's lit review? And it's interesting because it's like, you can't really do that until you do the experiment, right? I mean, it's like we couldn't, until I had the results, I wasn't sure what it contributed to. And it's one reason why, and I don't know what to make of it. I don't know if this is unethical or I don't know what this is, but it's like this material, I wasn't sure if this was context or conclusion, where it's like, is this the conversation it's entering, or is this what you take away from it? Where it's like, oh, the conclusion is this is what the base unit of contemporary literacy is, the human intelligence task, wherein we're the symbols to be read rather than the reader of symbols.
Yeah.
I was like, I'm not sure if this material was conclusion, there's a sense in which it feels like cheating, where it's like putting this at the front is almost like, it's almost like, okay, so this is the conversation we're entering. We don't know how it's going to end, but we do know how it's going to end. We do know how, because I did we did the stuff.
We did it all. We're done.
And so it's like, there's a sense in which it's setting up this mystery that we already know the answer to. And the mystery was set up post facto. So I don't know. I mean, and so I don't know. I mean, if I view this as lit review, it feels less like cheating. It's like, well, yeah, these are the people who talk about this.
Yeah. But that's always going to be an issue in a methods section because the results are to a certain extent implicit in the methods.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's set up. So it's like, well, yeah, you get what you were looking for. But, when we went into it, we didn't know how it was going to end. It's not like we constructed this in an unethical way in reverse, where it's like, well, this is the conclusion we want to prove. We did not do that. I mean, the videos speak to that. We never knew what the heck was going on.
Yeah, if there's any evidence of, no, I wouldn't say we maintained objectivity. We did maintain a general level of incompetence that resulted.
Ignorance.
Yes,
yeah.
Ignorance. Yeah.
I mean,
it is objectivity, but not knowing what you're doing.
Saving grace is ignorance. It's like we had no idea. And so, yeah, I mean, it's like we got the results and sort of, okay, well, what do we make of those results? And then it was like, oh, well, here's how that contributes to larger conversations.
Yeah, I mean, that's in many ways, that's why it's not cheating, because in many ways, the move here, I mean, in part, because of previous conversations, right? I mean, your computers and writing talk, right? These things have been, both directly and indirectly informing what we're doing because we're already aware of the kind of milieu that we're in. But what I think, I mean, it's not cheating because I think we've arrived at here through the kind of work that we've been doing. So we're not sort of retroactively plugging them in. It's that by virtue of the kind of work that we did, we sort of re-recognize them as important to the method.
Yeah.
So then that's now being sort of retroactively recognized. But in many ways, what we're doing is we're just teasing out what was at stake in what we were doing.
Yeah.
So in that sense, right, we're not adding it in. We're sort of not even adding it back in. We're just sort of re-recognizing, right? Like it's I lost the thread there, but.
Well, I mean, all that is to say, I mean, I agree. And this is the kind of thing, as you say, where it's like, it's reminiscent of the comments we got in the first product that were sort of like, I'm not sure what you're talking about. And, in terms of like, I'm not sure where this fits, because we got comments like where it's like, I'm not sure if this paper is for me because it's mostly like just kind of, pragmatics of text mining is like, I'm not sure I'm really
right.
And this also feels where it's like, it feels like as authors, we get it, but I'm not sure anyone else would be like, well, this is kind of scanty if this is what you're setting up. But if we see the methods as having two parts, the first part as lit review, the second part as here's the steps that we went through. So, here's what the surveys are. And just as a side note, the surveys are in whole included as appendices, but those appendices aren't on this just because it's a big pain in the ass. I mean, it's just PDFs of the appendices,
right,
of the surveys. Just as a side note. So, I mean, like, if the second part of this methods, which starts, I mean, you can feel the turn here where it's, let me share the screen. Yeah, I mean, speaking of meta discourse, I mean, there's this turn right here where it says, to make this exploration practical.
Right.
And this begins the content that really was originally composed for our IRB approval.
Right.
Which is, they really didn't have any interest in this other stuff. I mean, the IRB stuff starts here where it's like,
IRB wasn't interested in Ulmer?
no, not well. I don't know. Maybe personally, I don't know.
Yeah. They got to clock out and read this Ulmer.
Right. But I mean, like the prompts in the IRB, packet we're submitting, they're interested in like, so what's your research question?
Right.
And then they're like, because what they're interested in risk,
Is your research question going to hurt people?
Yeah. And, not to undersell it, because like you did have to provide, a paragraph or whatever of like context. It's like, okay, here's what we're doing in a way that is comprehensible to, an audience of academics, but not academics in your field,
Right.
And so it's like, they're not going to give a crap about a lot of this contextual stuff, but they are going to want to know through to, recruit subjects and what was promised to them. And here's the questions they had to go through. So you can feel the turn here where it's like all of this stuff to make this exploration practical.
Yeah.
To, here to the results. It's adapted from material that we had originally generated for IRB approval.
I wonder, I was about to say this is a stray thought, but at what point are they not stray thoughts? That turn, oh shit, it's gone. Right. There's a sense in which and just thinking to the and maybe this is my own not having been steeped in the MRAD tradition, right? That doing the lit review in the methods section suggests that it's not right, that the lit review isn't just sort of background or context, right? That our reading of these things is as practical as, so right, so the turn to make this exploration practical, I wonder if that positions, right, but how is the reading of Ong and Ulmer and Holmbeck, right, and that whole tradition, that's also practical, right? It's methodological. It's shaping how we're going about doing this.
Yeah.
So they're both practical explorations. They're just different kinds of practices. So in that sense, Ulmer's notion, like Ong's notion of the shift from orality to literacy to secondary orality, right? Ulmer's treatment of illiteracy, right? Those are as practically methodological as generating surveys. Yeah. Because they're having really precise effects on the ways in which we are approaching this thing. And so that means that and that gets back to earlier conversation, right? We're not name checking them to indicate that this is the kind of conversation we're a part of. We're pointing out that they are a part of the method that we are using to explore this, because they provided us some strong conceptual tools. Yeah. That are right. So we're not right. We're interested in this thing. And then here's our practical application of that interest. But it's not just an interest, it's not just a thing we're interested in, right? It's a theory as practice that's informed, right? This is Casey's made this point elsewhere, right? That in theory, the lit review is always your method section, right? What's my method? My method is all this reading that I've done. Yeah.
Yes. In a lot of humanities and sort of rhetoric paper, yeah, it's like, if that's what you're doing, is that kind of like active synthesis, right? Or introducing material into that plexus, then yes. I mean, the difference is we're turning to a different method, i.e., more or less survey completion
Yeah.
to get the evidence of what we want to assert. I mean, yeah, and I mean, that's kind of and as you notice with IMRAD, it's like there's not a discrete section for lit review, right? And it's because that it mostly comes from disciplines where the lit review is in some ways not dispensable, but it's like it's not really the meat of what you're doing the way that it is in a lot of humanities disciplines, where I mean, and you can see it in things like our apparatus, right? I mean, we talked about this before, I think, but like why MLA is MLA? Because it features authors and page numbers. It's like, what's important to us is the people and what they said and where.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
ethos is more important. Whereas, when you get into other disciplines that are more MRAD focused, it's like that's less relevant. What's relevant is currency. When was it said? The
Right.
person is, I mean, by intent in the sciences, they try and de-emphasize the personal.
Right.
The person
Yeah.
is not important,
The
right?
experiment was conducted.
Right. I mean, it's why the passive is used there. I mean,
Yeah.
these things are epistemological, where it's like, how are we making knowledge? And that's the reason why things like lit review is like, what's the contemporary thought on this? So it's not like it's a discrete section of IMRAD. And so
Right.
it's worked in either the introduction, where it's like, it's leading up to your research question by
Right.
saying, here's what has been said, or it's a methodological concern where, again, you're kind of answering this question about like, this is how I'm triangulating and this is how I'm going to go about it. But it's not a kind of like, it doesn't have the status of a discrete category. So there's a question of like, where does it go? Is it
Right.
the background of here's what's been said, here's what hasn't been said, so therefore that's what I'm taking on in this, setting up your
Yeah.
research question? Or is it part of your methods?
I think because in many ways it goes back to what we've been talking about, right? That in part, the Ulmer et al. Is that first part, right? It's the background, but there's also a sense in which, right? I mean, the reason the lit review gets dispensed in some MRAD stuff is because, right, they're using the tools of the apparatus developed by previous thinkers, right? So they came up with this kind of experiment, and I'm replicating it, or I'm doing it, right? So there's a sense in which, for us, because of the discipline that we're in, the lit review is both potentially, here's the milieu that I'm engaging, but there's also a sense that for us, Ulmer is the microscope. Right? That we're not just speaking to Ulmer, that Ulmer's theoretical approach is our apparatus.
Yeah.
Right. So that Ulmer is simultaneously the kind of conversation we're entering into, but Ulmer is also the tool that we're using to do this work. Right. So electricity is a tool, right? It's a microscope, it's a telescope, it's an EKG.
I mean, that's true, because certainly like in some methods sections, you will see those references to it's an adaptation of a previous experimental structure, or that kind of thing. I mean, if that's the case, then the question becomes like, does something like this need to be more fully unpacked, where it's like, what's going on in this table is the frame of this, I mean, it's like,
Yeah.
I mean, so I guess there's kind of two questions. One is, does this material make the most sense in this section? Or I mean, like, is it introductory material that's leading up to a research question, i.e.,
Yeah.
is the research question what goes here?
Yeah.
And I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah.
That doesn't feel.
Right. Because there's also a sense in which Ulmer is not, maybe this is what you're getting at with the kind of tongue-in-cheek discussion of cheating, because there's also a sense in which we didn't really use Ulmer as part of our method.
Yeah.
But we are speaking to it in some way. I mean, I wonder if it's discussion stuff.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of where it originally felt like it was going to be. The only caveat I was kind of finding with that is right now the discussion is already doing a lot of work.
Right.
You know? And in that case, it's like the discussion is doing a lot of different stuff. It's
right.
This, and by the way, it's that, and by the way, it's like it would be doing a lot of legwork. I mean, maybe that's where it goes.
Or maybe I mean, is there a world in which sounds very dramatic? Is there a version of reality in which the Ong and Ulmer stuff ends up in the third product? It's not in here at all. It's not in here at all.
Yeah, I mean, maybe.
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't know. I mean, it almost kind of feels like we need feedback. I'll tell you, I mean, like right now, as kind of usual, I'm too close to like even be able to answer those questions in a good way, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be helpful to have like someone read it and say like, this is tangential or whatever.
Yeah, or if we cut it, I think the response would be something we got with the first product, which is, who are you talking to? I'm 10 pages in and I've not heard any names I recognize.
Right.
Like,
we're talking.
Throw me an Ong so I know that I'm in the right room.
Yeah, I mean that's it's a realistic thing to say. It's like, who's your audience? And I think like we have a sharper notion of the audience, which is like, well, it's rhetoric people.
Right.
And it may not be just those who are like really into giving surveys, you know?
Right.
I mean, it's probably a broader, because I mean, like a lot of those readers were like, yeah, you know, but sure. I don't really care all that much. I mean, you haven't really explained what the subject is. And I'm not, a lot of this is kind of methods, you know, I see the pictures, but I just, you know, whatever.
Uh-huh.
I mean, it could be the same thing here where it's like, yeah, I mean, you gave a survey, but what do I do with this? Why is this relevant to me?
Yeah. And for MRAD, right, that comes in the discussion section. So partially it's also a kind of that we're right, as with ourselves early on in this project, right? I mean, I think for me in particular, right, learning MRAD is because I don't read a lot of it. So, but in many ways, we're asking our audience. Our audience is in part not saturated by MRAD people.
Yeah, and I mean, it's always a little bit of an awkward fit because it's not our discipline. I mean, you know, it's not our discipline. It's as is typical with rhetoric. It's like we're kind of borrowing something that's a little bit of an imprecise fit.
Right.
But it's in part because the sort of what we're turning to as evidence here is, you know, less common in rhetoric studies.
Right. But we can't simply use that evidence without doing the work of showing how we arrived at it, right? We can't, we're sort of obligated to write in MRAD because we kind of have to earn the results and the discussion section.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, you know, at least one of the readers of the first product was much more on that side, where was, you know, the one who's much more kind of strident about, you know, the method, you know, it's structured. You need to separate more clearly, right? Like method and result, because they're getting a little too blended here, right? I mean, those, and in traditional MRAD, that's why a lot of that is discussion, because they're at great pains to be, it's just built into the discipline that, it's striving for neutrality and objectivity, right? So it's like, here's what was said, here's how the experiment was structured, here are the results, and then the discussion, which is the last part, which is here's what we think those mean. But there's a great pains to set up. It's like, well, the results are objective, right? I mean, it's like, this was the experiment, here's what the results, that's objective, even though at a fundamental level, that's probably not true. It's still, it tries to divorce, the setup, the result, from any subjective notion of here's what we think those results might mean,
Right.
But I don't know, we can't quite cleave to that, I don't think.
No.
Without losing people before
Right,
they get,
without,
it's like, it's like, what you really want here is the discussion, but it's like,
yeah, right. It's people in the methods section going, okay, so what's important about this? I'm like, I can't do that now. I can't do that yet. Otherwise, I'll get yelled at by the social scientist who says, quit telling me what you think in the methods section or the results section.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, maybe, maybe we need to like read through it again. Cause like, maybe that like Ulmer and Ong, and that maybe that is discussion stuff. I mean, like maybe that's the culmination of the discussion.
Yeah.
Where it's like, but then it does sort of raise the question of, as you say, if that's pulled out, it's like, what leads up to this?
Yeah.
It pulls this conversation, it pulls this discussion, it pulls this act out of any context.
Well, I think we then need to rethink the introduction.
Yeah. I mean, it does have some context, but I think it might be context that our audience might not be all that invested in. I mean, right now the context is mostly like discussion about, GPT-3.
Yeah.
Where it's like, I don't know if our audience, unless
it's a quote about, it's a question about GPT-3 that appears on Boing Boing. So, right, it's a question that our audience might not be interested in a forum that's not really,
they haven't come across.
Which I get. I mean, I like the introduction that kind of places it in a more, I mean, for me, that's the rhetorical move, which is demonstrating relevance by pointing out that it's a part of the public conversation about these things. But I wonder if the introduction needs to both, I mean, start with an anecdote. Right. And
that's
then
what it's doing.
But
because I mean, like right now, the context, and that's why there are those overtures to things like how this manifested in essay writing. There are those gestures to, well, here's why you should care. It's like, there are studies on, they had auto text things write essays and they did pretty okay.
Yeah.
And they beat a lot of humans. Beat is subjective, but this is a subjective act. I mean, we're graders. And so, I mean, like, I think there is the spine of like a conversation there.
Yeah.
That would be relevant to the audience. Yeah. I don't know.
I think it's manageable. Yeah. Boop, boop, boop.
Yeah, I mean, look, so
we're at the funny noise phase of episode 57.
Well, I mean, because you can even see, like in the methods section, you've got these first couple of paragraphs which are clearly devoted to, so in the first piece, two things popped out that we thought were worthy of further investigation. Those were readability and trauma. Here's why we definitely didn't pick trauma.
Yeah.
And then you can see, I mean, again, it's like the meta discourse signal here to place this research within a context of Rett theory. And then it gets into the discussion of orality literacy and post-literacy. And then it has another signal where it goes to make this exploration practical, right? I mean, it's like just clear, overt meta discourse about here are the moves we're going through.
Yeah.
And there's a real question here about like, yeah, does this belong here? And then wherever it belongs, to what degree does it need to be beefed up?
Yeah, I mean, based on our feedback from the first one, right, is to place this research within the context of rhetorical theory, right? Imagine in manifold that's highlighted and it says, why is this on page 3? And not, yeah.
Where would it?
I know.
Where would it be better, at the start or at the end? I mean, that's a legitimate question. Like, where would that be better, as an introductory move or as a conclusion based on what we found?
I mean, I think in the context of traditional MRAD, at the end.
Yeah.
But we're trying to hook people. I would say at least a majority, however big or slight, doesn't give a shit about MRAD. So they'd want it right up front. I don't know if that's what I wanted to say, but.
Is there anyone else we'd ask about this? Is there anyone else we could have read it?
Yeah. I mean, we could have.
Which is the entire premise of this project. The difficulty.
Yeah, is there someone we could collaborate with on helping us figure out how to do this? I mean, Scott Graham would be, I think, I mean, he does the most work in this intersection.
Or Kegel.
Yeah, like how do you solve this problem of wanting to write in this mode, but yet, yeah, signaling early on.
Or, I mean, or in the end, it's like, we just have to make a call.
Yeah.
You know, get a manuscript together and then it'll get read.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a sense in which we're maybe being a little too precious about, we need to get this bulletproof, where it's like, that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
You know, it's just going to get gutted. And I mean, no matter how much we preface that with like, look, we know this should go here or here, you know, maybe this isn't the best spot. You know, it's like, I understand. But it's like, they're still going to have feedback about this needs to go here, there, or whatever. And, you know, that feedback may be mixed, where it's like, again, I can imagine someone saying this needs to come earlier and someone saying this needs to come later. This is conclusion, not preferable material.
Yeah.
I mean, that's how it goes.
Yeah. Preciousness is certainly not something I've not been accused of before. So,
well, it's just like, I mean, you know, kind of standard rhetorical stuff where it's like, you can't please everybody here. It's going to have to go, you know, you can't duplicate it and put it both at the start at the end. You're going to have to make a choice here and just, you know, be prepared for the consequences of the choices we make.
Yeah.
I mean, the worst that's going to happen is someone's going to give us a stern review about you should know better, this should go here or whatever. Wallpapering my home office with those, whatever.
Or we could just randomly drop in the word rhetoric in the introduction and just see where it sticks.
Interesting point. It doesn't really come up, does it?
Right. I mean, right. Still, GPT-3's occult ability to summarize books should be rhetorically contextualized.
even just literally
just dropping it,
putting the name of
just Kevin Nealon style, just keep saying rhetoric every third sentence. And
well, and you know, part of this also is because this came up where it's like, can we assume people who are looking at this are at least passingly familiar with the first one? Because this came up because it's like, you know,
I don't think so.
Well, and see, the first one had to do like a lot of the, when we did like the major revision, a lot of that legwork was like, oh, okay, here's what the project is. Because, you know, like the original manuscript didn't really describe. Because it was intended to kind of stand alone. But the flaw in that was it didn't explicate the project, right?
No.
So a lot of that revision, the first one was, you can't really talk about this product without looking at the product, but we can't replicate that in the second piece and say, oh, by the way, and then just cut and paste that. It's like, we've got to be able to move on, right? Where it's like, we can't go back and say in this second piece, by the way, here's this whole project for those of you who didn't. It's like, we just can't do that. There's a sense in which I'm viewing these more as book chapters than autonomous pieces. And we can't in this second one go back and do all that garbage again. It's like, just see the first one.
Yeah.
And I think there even is a footnote in here, maybe. That says, for an overview of M. Turk, see Terrell and Rivers 2020.
Nice. We got our first citation, buddy.
Well, what else do you say there? But I mean, like, that issue came up where it's like, if you come to this fresh.
Well, in that sense, that's not an unreasonable expectation that to make sense of this, you'd need to read something else. I mean, that's all journal articles and rhetoric, right? Like,
right.
I want to go read somebody's, well, you might, if some of this doesn't make sense, that's why there's a works cited page. Now I'm just developing an antagonistic relationship with our audience. I don't know, assholes, go look it up. Hey, how about you Google it? This is a footnote that says you might need a dictionary.
Well, I'm trying to think. So like, if you came to this, because that was, sort of like a rude awakening with like the first product. It was like, well, no, of course the readers are coming to it fresh.
Right.
They haven't encountered it through the project you're doing it. They just see this
they've not watched all 57 episodes before they read this article.
Neither have I, where it's like, they were given this as, it's like, can you review this manuscript?
Right.
It's tough for me to tell. Like, if you were handed this, clean, would you? Yeah, I don't know. I mean, would you have like those kind of foundational questions where it's like, I don't know what you're talking about here or what you're doing,
Yeah, it may be that I wonder if there's a different opening paragraph that we'll just not talk about. And that's the specific thing. And then when we talk about it need to be contextualized, that's then where the GPT-3 can summarize books as well as a human can. So we open it with a paragraph about rhetoric.
Yeah.
And then connect that out so that this concern within rhetoric is contextualized by linking it up to broader concerns about X. And some of those concerns speak to us, right? The notion of essay grading. And then we can add in, right, there's what's his name that writes a lot of stuff about robo grading. I can't think of his name. Is that hold on. Ow, shit.
That came up in the notes, I think, because we had sort of discussions about what context does this fit into? Is it sort of like the Texas Tech kind of thing?
Yeah.
Geez, I think that's in the notes somewhere, but that notes file is a mess.
What's his? It's right there on the tip of my tongue. The guy's name.
Yeah. Miller?
No, Les Perlman.
Okay.
And he's written both sort of academic pieces, but also he's kind of a public voice, writes op-eds and stuff. And that's because there's in the Latour collection, the final essay, the final chapter that Janelle Johnson and Jim Brown wrote, that's kind of an Aramay treatment of robo-graders. That might actually be something to go back and revisit.
Mm.
Because it actually tries to do, yeah, actually I need to go back and reread that and probably cite it, because it's a kind of an attempt to, right? There's actually a moment in that piece where the robo-grader recognizes a student from a previous thing they've written, right? So the robot literally reads they're able to read the student. The student becomes the thing that's read in that story.
Mm.
So that could be, and that's nicely anecdotal too. I mean, it could be a retelling that story could be a interesting hook.
Is that, I just put a comment here just at the end of this, just as a reminder.
And they cite, there's some asides to Les Perlman, I think, in there, in that piece.
I spelled it.
Do I have that with me, or did I bring that back to my office? Close enough.
Yeah. Edit, transposed. But that's just a reminder, right? That since talking about robo grading here.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I mean, this is revision. That's what it is.
Yeah. No, this was good.
Yeah, and we'll have to think. I haven't read this in, maybe a week. So it might be semi-fresh. I find that, with the passage of time, sometimes you'll come back to it and it'll be a little more clear, but also you're a little less locked into the structure as you see it. A lot of times I'll get like draft feedback months after the fact, and I'll be like, yeah, sure, I don't care. Do it, cut it, move it. I don't care.
Yeah. I love getting to that point.
Yeah. Where what is it?
I have no attachment to this at all. Just, like whatever. And what's funny is I end up liking those things better. Perhaps surprisingly, but like the more, the one of the things that I co-authored, it's one of the pieces I like the most, was like, it got rejected like 7 times. It's totally unrecognizable from the original version. And I think it's one of the best things I've ever written.
Well, revision works, right?
Yeah. Why a teacher of writing is surprised by that chain of events is the real surprise.
Well, I felt that about the first product, where it's like, there were significant revisions, but ultimately, like, now I think it's in much stronger shape. I was like, yeah, it is I think a lot stronger based on, really productive feedback, where it's like, oh yeah, it didn't really anticipate the audience at all. It's because, you're writing it from within it.
A weird Zoom bubble. Okay, so I'm going to go back and revisit that robo-grader thing.
Yeah.
And think about potentially a way of at least a version of the introduction that maybe gets to rhetoric quicker, so at least we can have the option of moving that Ulmer chunk.
Yeah, I'm gonna look at that, because honestly, when I was writing this, in the outline of this, that whole discussion was that whole thing was in the discussion.
Yeah.
And what happened was like the discussion started to have to do a lot, and it was just like, this is too many moves. There's too much shit on me. There's too much shit on me.
Yeah. Too many planets.
Yeah, right. There's a sweet spot.
Uh-huh.
And so it became like context, but I mean, maybe it's just not context. Maybe it is a finding, or maybe it's a development.
Well, and that maybe discussion is right, because it's not a finding, but it's a possible implication of our results.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. It's like, that's the question. Is like, is this an implication of results, or is it the context in which the results sit? And right now it's set up as the context, but it may not be.
Yeah.
And originally it was not.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe that impulse was accurate.
There's your answer.
It then, it opens the other question of then it's like a lit review-y question. It's like, well, then what's your lit review? What is the context then?
Yeah. Shit.
Which, I mean, if we have to do that, we have to do, I mean, like maybe the robo grading shit becomes that, I mean, it's well, then maybe it fits into this larger rhetorical question about, writing. I don't know.
Yeah. Okay.
Is Perlman, what is he a field scholar? What is he in? I don't know.
He's in rhetoric and composition.
Okay.
More composition, I think.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, like, because like on our notes, way back when we wrote this, that was an option. Like it said robo grading, Texas Tech /icon, Miller on robo grading. I don't know who the Miller is we're referring to there, unfortunately. Wonder if I can just Google.
Is it Richard? There's so many fucking Millers in this field.
Well, and I mean, it's a common last name. It's not an unusual one where you could. That can't be it. I don't know. I can't know.
Despite knowing there's lots of Millers, we just put Miller.
So typical.
Yep. Nailed it. Just put Miller.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's the thing. It's like, it's not like there's a shortage of stuff about robo grading.
No.
I mean, there's plenty. I wonder what we were referring to. Okay, wait, here we go. Oh, God, man.
Yeah.
Well, here's a, oh man, it's, okay, wait, no, this is helpful. This is helpful.
Okay.
Hold on.
Okay, calm down.
Well, it's because someone had done precisely that. I just found a paper that doesn't have a bibliography and it just references Miller. Someone actually did it. This might be it, though.
Finally did it.
Hold on.
They finally did it.
I mean, it may be referring to John Daly and Michael Miller.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay. Well.
Yeah, we're running out of steam here. I don't know.
Yeah, we're done.
Regarding the guest, as I mentioned, I did send a follow-up email, but it's just been radio silence, which usually is a signal I don't want to do this.
Yeah, read the room.
Yeah, so I don't know if I'm going to send a follow-up. Maybe I'll send a follow-up, but I don't want to be a pest, so I don't know.
Okay.
The person did initially say, sounds like something, I'd be interested in. It's just a busy time of the year, which is true. So I don't know. Do you have any leads?
No, not yet. I've not followed up on. Because I needed to do some background reading so that my pitch was a little more specific.
Right.
Hey, you're cool. Come talk to us. It's like, no, or you've written about this, and it's the
they wrote about it 10 years ago and their
Right.
interest has radically shifted since then. So
Yeah, but that's
I don't want to come hat in hand.
academia though. Forever you're the blank guy, right? It's
Yeah.
like, well, I was, but
Yeah. Like I do other things. Not just a tip calculator. Okay. Well, yeah.
Right.
So I think we've got some things to work on.
Yeah.
I've got someone to contact. Yeah, useful stuff.
Yeah, it's moving forward. I mean, we've got a draft. It needs to be fixed.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
Okay. All right. I'll talk to you soon.
All right. See you.